I'll be honest with you, this isn't the kind of story I ever thought I'd be telling. Not because I'm a saint. I've made my share of messes, but because I spent 25 years building a life on the idea that I was the sensible one, the loyal one, the one who didn't burn bridges. And now here I am, at 43, sitting in a studio apartment that smells like the previous tenant's cat, drinking tea from a mug that says "World's Okayest Mom," because my daughter thought it was funny last Christmas. I look at that mug some mornings and think, well, at least one of us still has a sense of humor. You want to know how I got here? How a woman my age with a mortgage, a partner of 6 years, and a respectable job in her ended up kicked out of her own home with 2 black garbage bags and a leaking air mattress. How I cheated on Mark with the man next door, and why I don't even have a good excuse. Just a list of small, sad reasons that added up like pennies in a jar I never meant to break. Let me start with the before. Mark wasn't a bad man. That's the part that makes people uncomfortable, I think. If he had been cruel, or dismissive, or if he'd hit me, then the story would have clean edges. You could say, well, she was looking for love in the wrong places because she wasn't getting any at home. But Mark was fine. He was fine for 6 years. When we met, I was 37, fresh off a divorce that had left me feeling like a piece of furniture someone had moved to the curb. My ex-husband, Dave, had decided that his yoga instructor was his soulmate. And after 17 years of marriage, I found myself sleeping in my sister's guest room, eating saltines over the sink because I didn't have the energy to sit at a table. Then along came Mark. He was quiet, steady, a high school biology teacher, with a gentle laugh and a habit of leaving the TV on for background noise. He didn't set my world on fire, but after Dave, that felt like a blessing. No more dramatic fights in the driveway. No more wondering if he'd come home or stay at the office again. Mark came home at 4:15 every day, changed into sweatpants and asked me how my day was. He remembered to buy almond milk. He fixed a leaky faucet without being asked. He was a good man. And for a while, that was enough. But somewhere around year 4, something shifted. Or maybe it didn't shift, maybe I just finally noticed the quiet. Mark and I didn't argue, but we didn't talk much either. Dinner was a rotation of the same 3 meals. Sex happened once a month, sometimes less, always in the same order, always with the lights off and a perfunctory "was that okay?" afterward. I started to feel like a plant that was getting watered just enough not to die, but never enough to bloom. And I told myself that was fine. I was 41. Blooming was for people in their 20s with their whole lives ahead of them. I had a good man, a decent house, a stepdaughter who called me once a week. What was I complaining about? Then Liam moved in next door. Liam was 48, divorced, with a salt and pepper beard and arms that looked like he'd spent his 20s lifting something heavy. He was a contractor, which meant he was always outside hammering, sawing, mowing the lawn in the summer with his shirt off. I noticed him the way you notice a nice pair of shoes in a window, appreciatively, but with no intention of buying. He was friendly. Too friendly, maybe. He'd wave when I got the mail, ask about my day, offer to help carry groceries. Mark thought he was a bit much, but Mark thought everyone was a bit much if they used more than 3 exclamation points in a text. The first crack happened in July. Mark was at a teacher's conference for 3 days, and I was home alone, painting the kitchen cabinets because I couldn't stand the beige anymore. Liam came over to borrow a ladder, saw me covered in white paint, and laughed. Not a mean laugh, a warm one, like I was a friend he'd known for years. He ended up staying for 2 hours, drinking lemonade and telling me about his ex-wife who'd left him for a chiropractor in Arizona. She said I was emotionally unavailable, he said, shrugging. Maybe she was right, but I think she just wanted someone who'd buy her a Porsche. I laughed. It felt good to laugh like that, deep and unguarded. I realized I hadn't laughed like that with Mark in a long time. Mark's humor was dry, almost academic. Liam's was messy, self-deprecating, the kind that made you snort mid-sip. Nothing happened that day. I swear it. He left when the sun went down, and I went to bed thinking, that was nice. It's nice to have a neighbor you can talk to. But nice turned into something else over the following weeks. Liam started finding reasons to come over. A broken sprinkler head, a question about recycling pickup, a leftover casserole from his mom that he couldn't possibly eat alone. I started finding reasons to be outside when he was outside. I'd water the plants for 20 minutes longer than necessary. I'd check the mailbox twice in an hour. Mark noticed, but only barely. "You're getting friendly with the guy next door," he said one night, not accusingly, just observing, like he was noting the weather. "He's lonely," I said, which was true, but so was I. The thing about affairs, at least, the kind that happen to women like me, women who never thought they'd be the type, is that they don't start with a grand decision. They start with 1,000 tiny ones. You let a compliment land a little too softly. You stand a little too close when you're looking at his phone to show him a picture of your garden. You touch his arm when you laugh, and you don't pull away immediately. And each time, you tell yourself it's harmless. You're just being friendly. You're just enjoying a little attention. You deserve to feel seen, don't you? The first time we kissed was in my garage. Mark was at a faculty meeting. Liam had come over to borrow a wrench, and I was looking for it on a high shelf. And when I turned around, he was right there, not trapping me just there, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Something woodsy and clean," he said. "You know you're beautiful, right?" And I laughed it off, because that's what you do when you're 42 and your hair is in a messy bun and you're wearing paint-stained shorts. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me, and I felt something crack open in my chest. I kissed him first. I need to own that. I leaned in just a few inches and he met me halfway. It wasn't a long kiss, or even a particularly passionate one. It was tentative, almost apologetic. When we pulled apart, he looked scared. "We shouldn't," he said, and I agreed. We both nodded, and he left with the wrench, and I went inside and made dinner like nothing had happened. But something had happened, and once you cross that line, the line doesn't really exist anymore. It's just a smudge on the floor. The affair lasted for months. For months of stolen hours, of texting in the bathroom, of lying to Mark's face with a smoothness that frightened me. I told myself it wasn't about sex, and it wasn't. Not entirely. It was about the way Liam looked at me like I was fascinating. It was about the way he listened when I talked about my day. Really listened. Not just nodded while scrolling his phone. It was about the way he remembered small things, that I hated cilantro, that my first car was a Honda Civic, that I was afraid of heights. Mark used to remember things like that. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped. Liam and I met at his place when Mark was at work. His house was messier than ours, but cozier old leather couches, records stacked in the corner, a dog that wagged its tail every time I walked in. We'd have sex, sure, but we'd also just lie there and talk about our parents, about the mistakes we'd made, about what we thought our lives would look like by now. He told me about his daughter, who'd stopped speaking to him after the divorce, and I cried like it was my own grief. He made me feel like I wasn't just someone's girlfriend or someone's ex-wife or someone's HR manager. He made me feel like me, and that right there is the part that makes me the villain. Because Mark wasn't a bad man. He didn't deserve that. But somewhere in my head, I'd rewritten the story. He's distant. He doesn't appreciate me. He's not present. I took the quiet of our relationship, the quiet I'd once been grateful for, and turned it into evidence of his failures. I made him the bad guy so I could be the heroine of my own story. The woman who finally chose herself. The unraveling happened on a Tuesday. A stupid, ordinary Tuesday. Mark had come home early because of a migraine. I didn't know that, because I was in Liam's bed, tangled in his sheets, laughing at something stupid he'd said. Mark had a key to Liam's house. Liam had given it to us months ago for emergencies, when he'd gone out of town and asked us to feed his dog. And on that Tuesday, with his head pounding and the house empty, Mark decided to go next door to ask if Liam had any ibuprofen. He found us in the bedroom. The door was open. I wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I'll never forget the sound he made. It wasn't a yell or a scream. It was a small, choked noise, like an animal caught in a trap. And then he just turned around and walked out. No drama. No throwing things. He closed the door behind him like he was leaving a doctor's office after bad news. Liam went pale. He sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I have to," and then he got dressed and left the room. I sat there naked, listening to him call his brother on the phone. His voice low and frantic. He didn't come back to the bedroom. When I finally got dressed and walked into his living room, he was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. "You need to go," he said. Not angry, just hollow. "Liam, please, just go." I walked next door. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. The front door was unlocked. Mark was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. He didn't look up when I came in. "Mark," I said. My voice sounded like a stranger's. "I'm so sorry." He looked at me then. His eyes were dry, but something in them had died. "How long?" I told him the truth. 4 months. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting it. Or maybe like he was calculating something. Then he stood up, walked to the bedroom, and came back with 2 empty garbage bags. "Pack your things," he said. "I want you out by tonight." "Mark, please, can we talk about this?" "We're talking about it." His voice was calm. Too calm. That was almost worse than yelling. "You made a choice. 1,000 choices, actually. And now I'm making mine. I don't want you here." I cried. I begged. I did all the things you do when you've been caught and you want to reverse time, even though you know you can't. I told him it was a mistake. I told him I loved him. Both of those things were true in their own way, but they were also not enough. Love doesn't get to be the get out of jail free card when you've spent 4 months eroding the trust it was built on. He didn't yell. He didn't call me names. That was the worst part. If he had screamed, I could have screamed back, and maybe some part of me could have felt justified. Instead, he just sat on the couch with his arms crossed while I shoved clothes into garbage bags, crying so hard I could barely see. He asked me to leave my keys on the counter. He asked me to leave the ring he'd given me for our 5th anniversary, not an engagement ring, just a promise ring. A silly thing from Etsy with an engraving that said "Every day with you is a good day." I took it off and set it next to the keys, and I felt the weight of 6 years slide off my finger like water. I called my sister at PM. She picked up on the second ring, because she's always been that kind of sister, the one who answers, no matter what. "I need a place to stay," I said, and she didn't ask questions. She just gave me her address and said, "I'll leave the light on." Liam didn't come out of his house that night, or the next morning. I found out later from another neighbor that he'd moved back in with his brother. 2 days after, he sent me one text. "I'm sorry for my part. I hope you find peace." And then nothing. No calls. No explanations. Just a ghost in the house next door. I stayed with my sister for 3 weeks. She was kind, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She'd been cheated on by her first husband, and she'd always told me she'd never forgive a woman who did that to another person. And here I was, sleeping on her pull-out couch, proving that even the sensible sister could turn into a klitsch. I found the studio apartment through a coworker. It's small, barely 400 square feet, but it's mine. I pay the rent with money I used to save for vacations with Mark. I eat dinner alone most nights, watching reruns of The Golden Girls and wondering when my life turned into a cautionary tale. The hardest part isn't the loneliness. I was lonely before. I just didn't admit it. The hardest part is the shame. It's the way my stepdaughter stopped returning my calls. It's the way mutual friends look at me now, like I'm carrying a contagious disease. It's the way I look at myself in the mirror and see a woman who had a good man and threw him away for the neighbor with the nice arms and the better compliments. But here's the thing I've learned. Sitting in this cat-smelling apartment at 4 in the morning, I didn't cheat because I was evil. I cheated because I was scared. Scared that this was all there was. Scared that at 43, I'd already had my last great romance, my last real laugh, my last moment of feeling truly alive. And instead of talking to Mark, instead of saying, "Hey, I'm drowning here. I need you to see me," I found someone else to throw me a lifeline. And then I blamed Mark for not noticing I was in the water. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But if you're a woman my age reading this, and you feel that quiet ache in your own relationship, the one that whispers, "Is this really it?" Please, please do what I didn't. Talk to your partner. Go to therapy. Take a weekend away together. Do something messy and uncomfortable and real. Because the alternative is standing in a garage, kissing a man who isn't yours, and thinking, "I'll deal with the consequences later." Later comes faster than you think. Mark sold the house 6 months after he kicked me out. I know because Zillow sent me an alert I'd forgotten to turn it off. He moved to a smaller place in the next town over, And last I heard, he's dating a librarian named Claire who brings him homemade scones. I hope she's good to him. I hope she asks him about his day and really listens. I hope he finally gets the love he deserved all along. As for me, I'm learning to be alone, not lonely alone. There's a difference. I'm taking a pottery class on Tuesday nights. I'm reading books again. I'm trying to forgive myself, a little at a time. The way you sand down a rough edge until it's almost smooth. And the mug? The one that says world's okayest mom. I still drink from it every morning. Because maybe okay is enough for now. Maybe being okay is the first step toward being something better. I'll let you know if I get there.